It's great to be joined today once again by economist Richard Wolff, who is Professor Emeritus of Economics at my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, currently a visiting professor at the New School University in New York City. So, Professor Wolff, we've been starting to dig into Donald Trump's 100-day plan and really specifically looking at the pieces of that plan that relate to the economy and sort of comparing and contrasting whether those policies, if made effective, would make America great again, as the phrase goes, particularly for the middle class, which is a group that Donald Trump really tried to appeal to. So there's a number of areas we could look at on this. His claims about withdrawing from NAFTA and starting trade wars, tax policy. We've already seen that his tax cuts are not going to be nearly as big as he initially said, and actually the lowest tax bracket is going to go from 10 to 12%. Whatever angle you think is the most relevant in analysis for the middle class, I'm glad to start there.
Well, let me give you what may not be the welcome news, which is that an honest appraisal of what has gone on so far is such a bundle of contradictions that I would be beware of anyone who claims to say it will on balance be positive or negative for this group or that group. The contradictions are so enormous that even if you read closely some of the pieces that are headlined as though they know which way it's going, when you read down into the body of the article, if it's a decent reporter or a commentator, they will say, but, you know, it could be, and then they basically tell you it could be the opposite of what the first part of the article asserted. And I don't think that's a flaw in the reporter. I think that's because Mr. Trump either doesn't know how to formulate a governmental program or doesn't want to reveal what it is he's in fact going to do, or doesn't much care. One of those, because it doesn't really compute. Let me give you some examples.
Yeah.
He names a fellow from the South, Price, to be his health secretary, a man who's committed, apparently above all else in life, to undo the Affordable Care Act, often known as Obamacare. And when he summarizes what he's going to do, he's going to, quote unquote, let the market decide. In other words, not to cover people as a right, as a feature of citizenship in the United States, the way most other industrial countries do, but rather to let supply and demand and profit-making companies produce whatever outcome they tend to produce. It's the market idea, which has usually been a veneer for self-serving of the business community anyway. But here the remarkable thing is, the same day that he announces Mr. Price's selection, he also announces with great excitement that he and Vice President-elect Pence are heading off to Indiana, having muscled, he claims, the Carrier Corporation into not making the market-dictated decision of moving about 1,000 jobs to Mexico, because what the market dictates to that company is precisely what Mr. Trump is there to prevent happening. Well, on the one hand, we're going to let the market decide. On the other hand, we're not.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second, because this gets into something that's so interesting. And yes, you know, we're going to delve really deeply into the entire carrier thing tomorrow. So I'm seeing in the proposals a sort of unusual mix of carrot and stick policies. So a carrot policy would be, for example, reducing the corporate tax rate and taxes on the rich to try to sort of lure them with the carrot, as the phrase might be, to make investments in new businesses, or it's basically supply side trickle down economics. And at the same time, you have stick ideas, this idea that Trump floated, which I guess now he's going to back off of a very harsh penalty for companies that move jobs out of the U.S. to other countries. Is this relatively unusual, this combination of carrot and stick policies to be floated, or is there something interesting to explore there that maybe isn't often looked at?
Well, again, it's possible that Mr. Trump and his advisors really are prepared to muscle and threaten companies that do not make market-based decisions of the sort they think will make them look good politically. It's possible. It has not been the behavior of most governments in the United States over the last half century, neither Republican nor Democrat. They sometimes talk a little bit about doing all of these things, but the reality, time and again, has been to basically not offend corporate America for fear of the political consequences of doing it. There is a toleration among the corporations for the language. They know that campaigns have rhetoric that goes over the top. They expect it. They're not badly thrown by it. They assume it's mostly froth that will subside once the election is over. And I think Mr. Trump, having narrowly, to say the least, won this race, would not be in a strong position to do something that might really unite corporate America against what he is and what he represents. Would be a strange thing for a man in his position to do, given our history and given his vulnerability.
Let's talk a little bit about trade deals. Many times trade deals are not really trade deals. They're multinational corporate power and ability to skirt national law deals. But to the extent that trade deals are trade deals, we are now starting to see more and more pieces be published by economists and journalists and commentators saying, the actual trade deals that are currently in place do keep down the costs of many products for Americans. And what Donald Trump is sort of ignoring is that although he might make himself feel good for keeping a campaign promise he may or may not have understood when he made it by starting to get out of trade deals he sees as unfavorable for Americans, this is going to there's another side of the coin to these trade deals, isn't there? So can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, if there's a trade war, first of all, does anybody win? And number two, are there ways in which these trade deals are good for Americans that is not really being discussed?
Absolutely. The answer to both of them is that there are trade deals, and then again, there are trade deals. Nothing is easier than to look at a deal that often takes 50, 100, 200 pages to lay out the specifics of, and find something you don't like, you think we could have done better, you will do better. This is theater. This is not serious work. A trade deal usually involves many partners, and even if it's only two partners, bilateral trade deals, it's a matter of give and take, like most deals. You get this advantage, but you give up that advantage. Otherwise, the partner doesn't make the deal with you. And that's the normal situation. Has the United States benefited from trade deals? The answer is yes and no. Some industries have done real well. Others haven't. The industries that suffer when we open our borders to production abroad have disappeared in the United States. We have a much, much smaller automobile industry in America than we used to because we import cars or we let foreign companies set up inside the United States. The same is true with computers. The same is true with cameras and a whole host of other products. Those industries have either disappeared in the United States or, in order to survive, they've moved production abroad, which is indeed what the Carrier Corporation is facing as its problems. It can't compete unless it has lower wages than it pays in the United States, confronting the United States with a conundrum. If you want to keep the products cheap, you have to lose the jobs. If you keep the jobs, you have to be prepared to pay very high prices. And basically, all the wheeling and dealing is about that struggle in terms of which side will prevail because it has more power. One thing to add, if Mr. Trump had the slightest intention to renegotiate trade deals in such a way that the American middle class is the beneficiary, then he would have to make use of the apparatus of the trade union movement in this country, of academics in this country, who have been working and advocating for such a solution for 50 years. He never speaks to them. He never invites them. He does not include them in any of the negotiations or plans, never has, makes no statement that he ever will, which means that to imagine that when all the dust clears, a billionaire president renegotiating trade deals will make sure, because he wants us to trust him, that he will take care of everybody without including any of the putative beneficiaries in the process.
Last thing I want to touch on in the limited time we have, one of these 100-day plan items is to label China a currency manipulator. Aside from whether that's an accurate allegation, does that labeling actually have any real-world impact in and of itself?
It could, because it could be the prelude to levying tariffs upon them, something else that Mr. Trump said during the campaign, variously 35% or 45%. To do any of this is to declare economic warfare on the People's Republic of China. And to do that is to take a very large step that in history has often ended up in a transition from economic warfare to the military kind. Let's remind ourselves quickly. Half of the goods that come into the United States from China are produced by subsidiaries of American corporations that have set up shop there. To cut them out of the American market with a tariff is a direct assault by Trump on the biggest multinational corporations in the United States, who've invested at least $300 billion to produce in China for export to the United States. Is that really going to happen? Do you think that's likely? Second example, the Chinese are the major creditor of the United States. They own, the People's Republic of China, more U.S. Treasury bills, obligations of the United States, than any other country on earth. The chaos that would erupt if they stopped buying, in effect, lending to the United States government, is hard to imagine, but the power of it is unmistakable. Do you really want to provoke that kind of confrontation? And thirdly, China is a second most important economy in the world. They built up their industries over the last 30 years by export. You close the world's largest export market to China, you are plunging that country into extreme measures. And they are a very powerful nuclear-armed society. One really has to scratch one's head and wonder whether Mr. Trump is just spinning his wheels or whether he's crazy if he's actually going to move in that kind of direction.
Well, we may find out sooner than later. We've been speaking with economist Richard Wolff. Always great having you on.
Thank you, David. Look forward to the next time.